Reverend Daniel Jenkins stumbled across these boys that really they were orphans. He didn't know it at the time, but he shortly discovered that they were orphans and they were living out of a abandoned boxcar.
How do you give someone who is hopeless hope? How do you change someone's opinion of another from enemy to friend instantly? How do you immediately control your mood like pressing buttons on a dial? Music always has, always will. Religious songs have carried messages of hope and faith for millennium. Changing one silly note in a chord can make us feel happy or sad. Music can make us feel upbeat, romantic, sad, forlorn, powerful, intelligent, all through the magic of rhythms and chords that our bodies are just made to respond to. Yep, music can change the world. This is a story about how one style of music, jazz, changed my hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, and changed a young country at the same time, and how it is still changing it today. This is also a story of why Charleston has a place in jazz history every bit as important as New Orleans. Make sure and stay till the end for a guaranteed musical mood changer.
Today I have a special guest, Charlton Singleton, joining Beauty versus the Beast. Charlton is an amazing human being. He was one of the founders of Charleston Jazz, became the band director for the Charleston Jazz Orchestra back when it started in 2008. He's a two-time Grammy Award winner with his band, Ranky Tanky, with a group of unbelievable musicians. He's been the resident musician over at the Gilliard. He won the South Carolina Governor's Award. He is an ambassador for music and jazz in South Carolina, and dare I say now the world, with all of his travel with his band, Ranky Tanky. So it's a special treat to welcome you. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely, no problem. Thank you for asking. Anytime somebody talks about anything with jazz related, especially to Charleston, I'm all in. So thank you for just reaching out.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. There's probably few people, probably count them on one hand, that really know the origin story of jazz in Charleston. Tell me the origin story of jazz in Charleston.
Well, I'll try to shorten it as best I can, but we tend to point to one specific spot in the Jenkins Orphanage as being what we affectionately refer to as a cradle of jazz. So 1891, 1892, somewhere around there, Reverend Daniel Jenkins stumbled across these boys that really they were orphans. He didn't know it at the time, but he shortly discovered that they were orphans and they were living out of a abandoned boxcar. And he went to the city and asked for a little bit of help. And he and his church organized what became known as Jenkins Orphanage. And so it was at this orphanage where Reverend Jenkins made available the opportunity for the residents there to learn different trades or crafts, things like painting or simple carpentry and stuff like that. One of the things that he decided to do was to have a music class. And there's a number of different stories about that music class and that theory of his. One of them, which was, I thought, very interesting, was that he noticed that some of the residents were kind of sickly and had problems with breathing and tuberculosis, and thought that if they were blowing into instruments that could help with their lungs and everything. So he hired these two recent graduates from Avery Normal Institute, which is over on Bull Street, still the Avery Museum. And they came over and they taught the residents in this one little class how to read music. And at that time, the music of the day were military marches that they would learn. And they would end up ragging, what we call ragging the march. And that was just some little simple inflections and things like that. Now, if you put that in the context of what jazz is, and jazz by definition is basically when you take a song and you improvise on it, you change it up somehow. They weren't playing anything that was ridiculously outlandish, or we hadn't gotten to bebop or any of the fancier things. They were just changing up the music. So technically, that's jazz. And while our sister cities like New Orleans, places like that, they will claim to be the origin, we believe that the same things that were happening in New Orleans were happening in Charleston and a few other spots in the Southeast, like Savannah. And so we're very passionate about being a part of that history. We're very passionate about having our story told and the legacy of musicians that the Jenkins Orphanage sort of churned out, and the people that came to the orphanage, even though some of them just came for the class and not being orphans themselves. But that tells you just how powerful and how educational that class was.
Are there any notable names, any interesting stories about they played with and where they went?
Yeah, the ones that I refer to quite a bit are going to be there's William Cat Anderson. He came to the orphanage at an early age. I think he was about 4, but he learned how to play the trumpet and he went on to become arguably one of the greatest lead trumpet players of all time and spent a good 20 plus years with Duke Ellington as his primary lead trumpet player. You also have Freddie Green, the guitarist extraordinaire, who many people in the jazz community will point to him and say that he is the greatest rhythm guitarist of all time. He played with the Count Basie Orchestra for just under 50 years, about 49 straight years. He was born here in Charleston, South Carolina, and even though he was not an orphan, his family is from downtown Charleston. He would go to the orphanage for that class. And then you had folks like Jabbo Smith, not necessarily the household name about amongst the common jazz listener, but during his time, he was regarded as the chief rival to Louis Armstrong. And if you listen to any of the Jabbo Smith recordings that are out there, it's a precursor to a lot of what became known as that contemporary style of jazz, like bebop. He had some licks, man. He could play. He could play. Those are pretty much the three that I point to. Also, there is Edmund Thornton Jenkins. This is Reverend Jenkins' son, who spent a majority of the time over in Europe, but was an extremely talented composer and did a lot of classical music composing. As of recent, his music has been popping up with programs with our Charleston Symphony Orchestra, with the Color of Music Festival that is produced by Lee Pringle. And then also the lineage of the Jenkins family continues with a young man by the name of Tuffus Zimbabwe, who is a very talented keyboard player. He plays in the Saturday Night Live band, but he is an extremely talented composer. He understands the legacy of his family, and I think recently he just cleaned up sort of a lot of the manuscript of Edmund's work, and so it's being presented quite a bit now. Yeah, that's it's pretty deep, and it continues.
Absolutely. Speaking of it continues, in 2008, interesting year, y'all decided to found Charleston Jazz, as it was known then, the Jazz Artists of Charleston. Tell me the reasons why y'all got together to do this.
Well, technically, I was not in that little sort of group that came together and met about it. And at the particular time, around 2006, 2007, it just seemed like there weren't a lot of things that were in favor of the local jazz musicians. And so a group of them got together and decided that they were going to try to make their voices heard, known, and be seen a lot more. And so they basically formulated Jazz Artists of Charleston in order to kind of present Piccolo Spoleto Jazz at the time. And shortly after that, in 2008, I don't know if you've ever heard this story, but Jack McCrae and I used to just chit chat quite a bit. And he would just give me little nuggets here about who's from South Carolina and all of this stuff and just drop some knowledge. And one day when I was playing at the Charleston Grill, he just sort of said, "Well, what do you want to do? Tell me some goal that you have." And I said, "You know what? I want to put together a big band and I want to have folks like Oscar and George and Lonnie, these elders and everything. And I want to do one of those or something like that." And he just sort of left it at that. Just one day he called me and he said, "Hey, remember that idea we talked about a year ago?" And what idea? We've talked about a lot. And he said, "Well, can you put together a band? We're gonna have a little sort of powwow thing for the Charleston Jazz Initiative." And I said, "Sure." And I called up a bunch of friends of mine, Robert Lewis and Mark Sturbank, and I had my quintet sort of as the rhythm section, and called up a bunch of other friends and said, "We're just doing this show. It's just going to be a big band show. We're going to highlight all of the musicians that are famous or made songs famous from South Carolina or contributed. We're going to call it the South Carolina Hit Parade." And they were like, "Okay, what's the name of the band?" And it just can't be the big band. I was like, "Oh, we'll just call it the Charlton Singleton Orchestra." And so we did that show in front of about 200 people, maybe, at the music hall, which is very small. I think 175 of them had free tickets, but it was a hit. And literally after that, the next day, people were asking, "Well, when are you doing another show?" And that started the wheels turning. And then it changed over names really quick. We thought that we would have a better shot at getting some funding. And so we changed it to the Charleston Jazz Orchestra. Ta-da. The rest is history.
Right. That's a great story. So, what makes jazz and music so special to the Charleston area?
Oh, I mean, just historically, we always talk about Charleston being this artsy place, and fine arts is so big here, and all of the people that would come here for a vacation, but they would be working vacations. There would be musicians that come to Charleston that would use Charleston as a getaway spot for them to come and write music, rehearse, or try it out in different bars because it's not the biggest city, obviously, but it had enough little spots that you can go into and you can work out your material. And to this day, I think Charleston still has some spots, and they're kind of hidden, but there are some spots like that. White's Paradise was this sort of hotel and club, but you could go in there and see James Brown. You could go in there and see Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Ray Charles. They would all come through in order to work out new material, and they would stay and play for a few days or whatever have you. You had County Hall, but that was the big spot to play. If you played there, this is before you had the Gilliard Auditorium, but County Hall was the spot. Louis Armstrong would come and play at the County Hall. But Charleston just always had that lure like that. And I think that if we talk about it more, if we educate people more, then they'll start to appreciate a lot of these clubs, and a lot of them will stick around. For Charleston to have the history that we do, that people are just now starting to figure out and starting to ask questions about, I believe we should have a little bit more action. If I had to pick one thing that really separates us and places like Savannah and New Orleans, I think those places, they talk about jazz in the historical context of their city a lot more. And the people that live there are able to recite it and just talk about it and market it a lot more.
Yeah, we need more clubs like Forte in the area.
Yeah,
Helping.
yeah, exactly. When I jumped into the scene in the early 90s, there was the Chef and Clef. There was also, before that, it was Henry's. Henry's is still there, but Henry's was a jazz club that Mr. Lonnie Hamilton used to play for many, many years. There've been a ton of spots.
Two things I'd love for you to talk about: the origin of the plunger in the trumpet in Charleston, right? And the Charleston rhythm.
Oh, okay. Let's start with the plunger. Bubba Miley was a great trumpet player, cornet player. He played in Duke Ellington's band in the early part of Duke's beginnings, or the beginnings of Duke's band. And Duke and Bubba wrote this song called Black and Tan Fantasy. And it's a song that it's kind of a little medium tempo. It's a duet between the trumpet and the trombone. And in this, he uses a plunger in order to make this wah wah sound, which at that time back then, everybody just thought that was the greatest thing that they had ever heard and the most unique thing. From our family at Charleston Jazz Initiative, once again, Dr. Karen Chandler, Jack McCrae, just doing by digging and digging and digging, we conclude that Bubba Miley did not necessarily come up with that idea. And in fact, it was a group of orphans from the Jenkins Orphanage that he had seen in their travels throughout the state and the southeastern part of the United States. And so there's that about the plunger mute. And when I talk to students about that, and I remind them that when they watch Charlie Brown and they talk to an adult and you hear that wah wah sound, that's actually a trombone player with plunger mute. So more Charleston in some of the most famous cartoons ever. What was the second part of your question?
The Charleston rhythm.
Oh, the rhythm. The Gullah rhythm is straight up from Western African countries. It made its way over to the United States and to where we are. It, I guess, gathered its momentum on these Gullah Islands, and that Gullah Geechee corridor that stretches from Wilmington, North Carolina, down to St. Augustine, Florida. And that rhythm is just infectious, and you can find that rhythm in just about any sort of popular music that we listen to today, whether it's jazz or pop music or R&B, gospel, folk, country. It's all in there.
Can you share what that rhythm sounds like?
So if you are clapping, it's going to sound like this: 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, ah, 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 ah. And it's broken down into 3 parts. There's the one clap, there's the half clap, ah, ah, ah. Then there's the full, ah, 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 ah. And you can hear that in just about any type of music that you think of.
So many of these stories, the origin from Africa of this unique rhythm that grew up in the Gullah Geechee community in the States, that came from a pretty horrible story, right? And Jenkins, these kids were poor. They were using this as a fundraising effort so that they could survive. How does music unite and uplift, and why is it so important?
Jazz is one of the most, to use the word, democratic type of musical communication that you can have. Because anytime that you are in a jazz situation and you're performing, you are listening to somebody else in the band and you are getting ideas from those other persons, whoever is playing in your group. So you're talking with each other musically. And so it's because jazz is that way, because we all improvise, because we all listen, because we all take into consideration what someone else is playing. I think that's what makes it so unique. I think that's what makes it universal, because I can go to New Zealand tomorrow and say, let's play Straight No Chaser. Okay, running with it. Don't know who they are, never met them, just walked in, call a tune. It's universal like that for real. And they're going to say, how do you want to do it? Where do you want it? How do you want to do it? we're going to do it as a bossa nova. We're going to do it as a samba. We're going to do it as a fast swing. We're going to do it as a ballad. We're going to do it this way. And everyone will be able to communicate and contribute to that conversation. And that's why I think when people use that word, it's democratic like that, with no political affiliation, but just the true essence of everybody contributing like that. That's what makes jazz so unique and so special.
Sharing and uniting toward a common musical purpose.
Mhm.
Charlton, thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights.
Absolutely.
I gave Basil an opportunity to share a few stories about you.
Ooh,
Share,
goes
share,
way back.
share a story or two about Basil.
Gosh, there's so many. I mean, just the quick backstory on that is Basil was my band director. He quickly became a teacher and a mentor, and then after that, teacher, mentor, sometimes musical confidant. But even still to this day, there's a lot of things I'll pick his brain on. My teaching style, I think, is definitely based off of Basil Kerr. And while my maternal grandfather and my uncle, my mom's brother, are storytellers, I definitely get the whole thing of standing on the stage and breaking it down to students or the crowd from Basil Kerr. There's definitely going to be some sort of background. He always did that with us as students. He felt that it was important that we understood the piece in order to give it the sort of emotion that sometimes that he felt that the piece needed, which I will forever be grateful to him for that, because I think that adds to the experience. And if you've ever seen me, and you've seen me on stage, I think that the crowd is going to listen a little different if I can personalize it a little bit. One time we did a show and I said, "This is a ballad we're going to do right now. This is a couples skate song." And I think everybody probably put themselves in that skating rink at that time. I totally got that from Basil. I'll tell you, for my senior year in high school, I participated in the yearly senior band prank, which was we were to go and egg Basil Kerr's house. um, but always just someone great to talk with and get advice from. He was one of the people that made me take the job teaching at the Charleston School of the Arts. At first, he was like, "I'm calling in a favor. I need you to call me back and take this job just for the rest of the year." And I avoided him. And then my wife stepped in and said, "You need to call him and you need to go and talk to him and take that job." And that was the end of that. But I got there and I was still kind of on the fence, and he and the principal are talking with me, and he takes me down to the sixth graders and he's talking with the sixth graders, and he asks them who wants to play or give an example. And they're sixth graders, they're just beginning, but they were also so enthusiastic about it. And I'm sitting there and watching them and I'm like, this is incredible. These little kids are just so fun. And he stared at me and he saw how taken I was by it. And he looked at the kids and he said, "This is Mr. Charlton Singleton. He's going to be your new band director."
Hook, line, and sinker.
And that was and years had already passed before this happened, and he would call me up still trying to get me to take the job, and he said, "All right, this isn't Basil, this is Mr. Kerr speaking, you know." "Call me back now. I know you heard me." He called in the radio station that I used to listen to, Fan Talk, local radio station. He called in and he said, "I'm not here to talk sports. I know Charlton Singleton is listening out there, and he needs to call Mr. Basil Kerr right now."
That is persistence.
Yes, yes, but it worked.
So when is your next album coming out?
That's a great question. I am actually now. Are you talking Charlton Singleton or are you talking Ranky Tanky?
Yes.
Yes. Well, the Charlton Singleton next album is currently being worked on. We've done a good majority of the recording. We have some special guests that are going to be on it. And so it's being passed over to them in order to put their musicality onto it. The Ranky Tanky band has been busy in the studio. Don't have a date or anything, but sometime in 2024, you should hear some new music from Ranky Tanky.
Well, I have to say that I heard this village, yeah, and how you set up the story of that song. If you don't mind,
Basil Kerr. But that song, that particular song, This Village, that song is about people that are near and dear to you that you can go to and that will take care of you if you need, will give you advice, will lend you whatever they have in order to help you at the time. And that's how the Gullah community has always been, even to this day. But if you don't live in the Gullah community, I think you still have a little village outside of maybe your immediate family that you can go to. And so that's what that song comes from.
I can't wait to buy that album and your album as it comes out.
Thank you.
Charlton, thank you so much again, my friend,
Absolutely.
for joining this, and I will talk to you soon.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
All right, Basil. Well, welcome to Beauty versus the Beast. So glad to have you on our program to talk about Charleston Jazz, all things Charleston Jazz.
My pleasure to be here. It really is.
Absolutely. So first, tell me about yourself. I know you're incredibly passionate and experienced in music education with an amazing background that the Academy is blessed to have you on board. What makes you so passionate about music education?
I got hooked a long time ago. I found out that historically my family's been involved in music education in the past. My great-grandfather was teaching some of the first African-American classical composers in New Orleans.
Really?
Yes. And that was something that we just discovered in the last 20 years.
Wow.
Doing one of those, those ancestry things.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty cool. Anyway, he had no idea. One of the ladies at my church would, when I would play at the church, she would go, "You just have so much talent in your family," and I didn't know what she was talking about. Obviously, she knew.
Yeah.
I went to college to major in music. I was a French horn player. I was not a jazz musician. I was going to be a symphony player. I liked Mahler over Miles. It was just how it was as a French horn player. I went to a school in Coral Gables in Dade County named Flagg-Amity Elementary. Flagg-Amity was a little elementary school, overwhelmingly Cuban, a small percentage of Anglo, small percentage of African Americans, and a tiny percentage of Vietnamese that was at this school. So it was a really interesting mix of people, very diverse.
Yeah.
It was the bicentennial year, so all the music teachers were doing stuff about, it was 1976, so of course we were going to do that. But my first day, the music teacher, her name was Vicki Ballard, she told me to go into kindergarten first class. That was the first class I was going to teach. And to go into kindergarten class, you have to go in playing your instrument. Well, I was going to play the French horn. So she said, well, here's an auto harp, learn it. So I learned how to play the auto harp and could strum that. I walked in, and I was walking in this tug on my leg. I looked down, and there's this little kid that just had recess, obviously. He had dirt all over his face. He's just looking up at me like,
what is that?
And I'm like, okay, that's nice. That's cool. And we did our activity, and the kid never stopped looking at me. So at the end, I went to the teacher while they were moving to the next activity, and I said, well, what was with the little boy? And he goes, oh, Mikey, he comes from a broken home. His mother and grandmother have raised him from infancy. You're the first male role model he's ever interacted with, basically.
Wow.
All the teachers have been female. So I was the first guy. So he actually got to see a grown-up guy, 22, but a grown-up guy, and he was fascinated. And I thought about that, and I realized as a musician, when I perform in a concert and we do a fantastic job and everyone is uplifted by the concert, that feeling of uplift lasts about a couple of days, and then you're back to your humdrum day. Just by showing up in that classroom, I made a profound impact on this young man just by being in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, that's an awesome responsibility and also more meaningful.
Yeah.
So I kept playing. I still played. In fact, I was a contract musician with the Miami Philharmonic before I graduated. But I decided at that point, I really wanted to go into music education. And since then, flash forward, it's 48 years later, and I'm still doing this. And I still remember that young man. He probably had more of an influence on me than he realizes. Like I had more of an influence on him than he realizes.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of things like that. I came through that. I'd spent a lot of time. I taught at Wando High School. Then I did PhD work at the University of South Carolina. Then I came back and did the School of the Arts. And I, quote unquote, retired from the School of the Arts in 2018. Then I had to go back in 2019. And then I ended up teaching AP Music Theory there in 20 and 21. Well, anyway, the long and short of it was, I was fascinated with what was going on with Charleston Jazz. And one of the things that got my attention when I was at School of the Arts was we had kids would come in and audition for us from schools that were not doing very well, Title I schools, like that. And we had a young man come in to audition for us. And our audition was very simple. Sing My Country 'Tis of Thee, match pitches, match rhythms, and then we'll have a short interview and then we'll leave.
Yeah.
So this young man comes in. He's from, I'm not going to mention the school, but it's in an area that we are all familiar with. Anyway, he came in and we said, okay, now sing My Country 'Tis of Thee. He says, well, I don't know that song. And I said, didn't your music teacher show you this? And he goes, well, I haven't had a music teacher since third grade and she only came once a week. I'm like, well, how did you know about this? Well, my guidance counselor sent me, but they didn't know anything. So he came in, he didn't know anything. And I said, can you sing Twinkle, Twinkle? Nah, I'm not sure. But I said, how about Happy Birthday? He says, I can do that. So he sang Happy Birthday and it was okay. But by the time we'd gotten to that, his interview time was over. So, and at that point, I'm like, the School of the Arts, we're an audition-only school. That kid was out before he came in the door. And it wasn't our fault. It was the fault of the school and the administration and all, and their
system,
the lack of value for what we do. And I really decided at that point that I wanted to get involved with an organization that was going to try and reach into those schools specifically, not at the expense of the other ones, but bring everybody in and do that.
What were the challenges in music education that the Jazz Academy was created in order to try to meet?
Okay, there are several things that have happened in music education. This is an area of the haves and the have-nots, and it really depends on the community in which the school exists. If you are in an area like Mount Pleasant or Somerville, Daniel Island, if you're in places like that where the families value the arts or the whole person education concept, they put pressure on the schools and the schools will deliver. When you are in the neck area of the city of Charleston, North Charleston, or you're up in the inner parts of North Charleston, or even in the rural areas, you're really in survival mode. And the principals, administrations of those schools, I saw this firsthand working with a school in Sumter County. They would say, look, we just need to teach these kids to be functional adults. To be able to read, to be able to do simple calculations, and everything else is just whatever. And let's just get that done. There's one example that's different. Burke High School, the band director there, Leonard McLeod, he and I have known each other since high school. We've been friends all that time. But the Burke band, every child who graduates out of the Burke High School band goes to college. Every one of them.
That's amazing.
And they all do well. Most of them have become leaders in their community. On our case, what we're looking at though, and this is what David and I talked about, was reaching into these schools, which was a difficult task because administrators don't trust us. We're outside groups. Outside groups have come and gone, and the kids aren't any better off, the school's not any better off, and everybody gets burned. So we had to show them, they had to trust us. But then everything shut. And David got an opportunity to go teach at Coastal Carolina University and get a professorship there in the middle of the pandemic. And I'm like, yeah, sure, you've got to do that. But I'm sitting there going, what are we going to do? How are we going to? And so, but it was an opportunity for us to, it was like a reboot. We were able to reboot it and we brought in new faculty. We came up with some plans that were a little more concrete, things like we were doing only private lessons at that point, bringing in a couple of kids and creating combos on demand, but not a class. So we decided we were going to do combos as a class. Then we decided to do combo camps. And the combo camps, we made a real effort to reach into those Title I schools.
Yeah.
No, but the demand grew because the word got out, and it was really, it was word of mouth from kids and parents.
Yeah.
You know, they want to send their kid to a camp anyway. But then when the kids come back and say, man, we just played this really awesome jazz chart. And they're like,
right.
Well, I don't know about jazz, but that sounds pretty good to me.
But that sounds cool.
Yeah, and we do our show every Friday at the end of camp at Fox Music House. Thanks to Joseph Fox doing that for us. We did that, and it grew. And then we were able to create something new, an all-girls combo, because girls don't play jazz the same way guys do. There's a men from Mars, women from Venus kind of thing. Females tend to, and this is part of my research when I was doing my PhD too, females tend to organize things, want to make sure everything is right, and then they make a step, then they make the move, and then they make sure everything's right and move to the next one. Guys go from point A to point B in a straight line, but when we created a girls combo where they were able to express themselves and be comfortable with themselves and play as a group, it changed them. Then at the end of that year of girls combo, the girls said, now we want to play with the guys. We like playing with each other, but we want to play with the guys because we want to show them we can do this. And so we did. And so now we have, like in our combos, we have a young lady who's the top trumpet player in the All-State Jazz Band. We had a young man, his name was Manny. Manny was a sax player. He went to SOA, but he wasn't the best player. He got in because when we auditioned him, we saw his bright eyes. We knew that he had potential. This is before I did the job at the academy. He showed potential. So we brought him over. We gave him a scholarship so he could come in, get lessons, and at the end of his senior year, he got a scholarship to go to Coastal Carolina University and major in music.
Wow!
And so he's there. That's where. So that was a pretty successful first. A little bit later, now we have a young lady who's currently at our school, and she started in middle school, and when she was in the middle school band there, coming into the high school band, she was very shy, and she played the trombone. You can't play the trombone and be shy. You know, it's too obvious. The horn, everyone wants to hear it.
Right.
And the Lynx took her under their wing. After Manny left, they took her under their wing. So they had a Christmas party, and they wanted her to come and play. And she was freaking out. She had never played in front of a crowd of people. And I said, there's nothing to it. Pick a song you want to play. And so she said, okay, how about All I Want for Christmas Is You? And I said, great. There are backing tracks for that. We can make this work. So we worked on it. Well, we go to the thing, and she gets up, and she explodes. She just blows up. She blooms. It's like she plays it, and she's playing it out there. She's going to town. She's doing great, and they give her a standing ovation at the end.
No kidding.
It was awesome.
Wow.
Just think about it. It gives me chills. But the funny part was afterwards, she said, play some more. And I said, well, she's only got the one right now. But we're working with her right now on that one. And they go, well, that was great. Okay, so they were talking to her, and it boosted her because here were these successful black women who were talking to her and congratulating her, and her mom was like about to bust.
Oh, I bet.
And that's the kind of thing we're talking about. And then we had, at the combo camps, we had a group of kids that Leonard sent from Burke as a group. So they came in, and the Burke kids, I remember this young man, his name was Ephesian. It's easy to remember if you do your Bible.
Sure.
He gets in there, and he's like, not so sure about this, and by the end of the week he's improvising. The other kids in the combo jump in. There's a trombone player in there. He is blasting it out. Bunch of wrong notes, we don't care, because if you're going to be good at this, you have to put yourself out there. You have to have courage. So all these kids were encouraged and motivated, and so there they are, and they're back at their school, and Mr. McLeod says that they hang out after school and jam. They haven't been able to come back to the academy, but this summer they've already signed up. So they're going to be back at the academy as a group playing for us.
So what makes jazz such a unique art form?
We always say that music is a language, and it is. But there's a difference between, as a classical musician, I had to learn this. There's a difference between the way classical music is done and the way jazz is done.
Yeah.
Classical music is like reading a novel.
Yeah.
You get this piece that's composed by somebody, and you have to study it, you have to learn how to do it, and then you have to play it in unity with other people and make it work that way.
Yeah.
It's mostly a visual first, oral second. You have to look at it, you have to read it, you have to learn it, and then you listen when you play with everybody else for the context. Jazz is like a poetry slam. You come in and you'll learn a tune. There'll be some standard from the American Songbook.
Yeah.
Then everyone has to take the musical background of that song, like whatever the song is, in the back of your mind, you're hearing it, and now you're going to improvise. You're going to create new melodies around it, and this is not an easy task.
Yeah, sure.
This is much more complex than a lot of people think, because it's like learning a language.
Yeah.
We talk about this all the time with children who are nervous about improvising for the first time. I said, when you were a baby, did you speak perfect English when you were born? Well, no. I said, well, what did you sound like? Well, I didn't make any sense at all. And I said, that's right.
Yeah.
Babies go, blah, 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 and they say mama, and all of a sudden mama reacts, and the baby goes, okay, that's mama. I got it. Blah, 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 dada, and dada reacts. So and they react, and pretty soon you've got a vocabulary. Well, when you're doing jazz, it's the same thing. You'll be playing something, and it does actually happen. You'll be playing something, and all of a sudden something that really fits what you're doing.
Yeah.
And everybody goes, oh! And
Yeah.
and he goes, oh, well, I'll keep that in mind. And that's the beauty of jazz. The thing about jazz is improvisation does not make up anything. There is a context, and there's a language, and they have to recognize that as they develop their skills, so that students can see that. The other thing is that when you're playing in a combo, which is opposed to a jazz band, in a combo, everybody has to do this.
Yeah.
In a jazz band, you can play in the third trumpet, and you might never ever have to improvise. You just kind of hide out behind the stand. But in a combo, you got like 5 to maybe 8 players, and they have to make up their tune when it's their turn.
Yeah.
And what you find is that everybody in combos tends to be very supportive of the. So we have kids who are in our combos whose nobody knows what their socioeconomic status is.
Doesn't matter.
Don't matter. Don't matter if you're black. Don't matter if you're white. Don't matter if you're female. Don't matter if you're male. Doesn't matter. You are welcome. And there's something. We're also expanding. We do instruction from 4th grade kids all the way through adults. And all of them are geared towards hearing the music and learning to play it. So I think that's been, as a teacher and as the director of the Jazz Academy, to me, those are the things that make a difference.
Yeah.
We believe in what we're doing so much now. We want to go to some schools that just can't get their kids into us. For example, right now, St. John's High School, this is a success story. St. John's High School has not had a really functioning band of any kind for over 20 years. They have a band director, but the structure of the way the schedule is doesn't really support the band. Those kids that we went down there and worked with, they wanted to do a combo, but they couldn't get to us because it's a ride. So we decided we were going to try and meet them where they were.
Yeah.
So we set up a combo. Gavin Smith, one of our really good teachers, is running that combo after school with the band director, who's a young man from Ohio in his 20s. We've invited them to come and play at our Academy recital in May so that they can meet other kids, because they've been doing it there. But if we meet them where they are, we can get them going. Well, what's happened is now those kids are not in the band class because this semester they can't be. They're meeting after school once a week, and they are jamming.
No kidding.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I talked with our outreach person, Abby. She went out there yesterday and observed the band, and she says they are just doing great. So
finding a life of its own.
Yeah, and of course that gives us a chance to go to the administration and say, okay, you see how we did this?
Right.
These kids want this so bad.
Yeah.
Can you maybe make the band all year round instead of one semester here and one semester there? Transform everything.
So we'll see.
Yeah. The other thing, the middle school band now has a combo.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that middle school band director's career he's changed his thoughts, because he was working on teaching kids to get and move up to high school band, but there's no high school band. So what was the point? Now they're playing in a combo, and that St. John's has got a combo. So we're making an impact in that entire area of Charleston County.
Right.
And again, this is through a grant that we received from folks out on Kiowa Arts, etc. So, and that's the thing, folks like that, when they see what we're doing, and they see the eyes lit up, and the way the kids feel pride in what they're doing, they'll support that.
Yeah.
I believe that we don't have to beg people. We just let them see what their kids are doing, and those people will come. They will come and help us.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And you were one of Charlton's teachers.
I was his band director in high school.
Yeah.
And
so tell me something fun
about Charlton.
About Charlton.
Okay, Charlton. In high school, he actually played baseball. He was a good pitcher.
Oh, no kidding.
And then he got serious about playing the trumpet, and the baseball coach, his name was Raj Duncan. Raj says, "You'll never make a living as a musician, but you can play some baseball." So
2 Grammys later.
Raj. The other one was when he was in the band room. He was also one of our drum majors. But he was in the band room. He would be back there playing on the marimba and just playing random tunes. So it became, after school, there'd be a Stump Charlton. So we'd like find obscure things like, can you play the theme song to I Dream of Jeannie? Bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, bum. What?
He's got an unbelievable ear.
Yeah. So and I finally caught him because I had to dig.
Oh, I bet you did.
I said, McHale's Navy. He's like, bum, ba-dum, 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 ba. Oh, then he got it. But I got some satisfaction.
Right.
Because they couldn't
5
stump
seconds.
Couldn't stump on it. Couldn't stump him. It was great. I had like 5 seconds of glory. That was it. But the thing about him, he was also part of a group of guys called the Buddies. And in addition to Charlton, Steve Spalding was in that group.
Yeah.
And at the time, I had darker hair. And when they graduated, I didn't have that dark hair anymore. It was graying out because those guys they were a lot of fun. But they were all really smart, very talented musicians. Charlton told me recently, he says, when I tell those stories when I'm doing shows and stuff, he says, I learned that trick from you.
Yeah, that's cool.
Because he liked the stories.
Yeah.
And he's got an ear for stories. So
he does.
And it helps that his dad's a preacher. But
he preaches the story of music.
He does.
Well, Basil, thank you so much, not just for what you're doing for the Academy, but everything you've done for music in the Charleston area.
Today we have Tatiana Baylot, who is the Executive Director of Charleston Jazz. Welcome, Tatiana.
Thank you, Matt.
So, Charleston Jazz, what makes Charleston Jazz so unique? Not just in an organization, but jazz in Charleston. Tell me the story.
Yeah, Charleston boasts a very rich cultural history and heritage that's deeply rooted in the African American culture. And part of the culture, the Gullah Geechee heritage, which is a distinct culture developed by the descendants of enslaved Africans, infuses Charleston's jazz scene with unique rhythms, melodies, and storytelling traditions. We now here at Charleston Jazz are trying to continue having this training ground for musicians through our Charleston Jazz Academy.
Wow. So tell me about Charleston and Charleston Jazz. What are some of the challenges locally now that have the attention of Charleston Jazz and drive your mission?
So Charleston Jazz had this need in 2008 that there really needs to be an official organization that works on it every single day to support this art form here in Charleston and beyond. And so since there is such an incredible history here in Charleston, it seemed like we have got to make sure that this tradition continues, to make sure you have someone like Charleston Jazz intentionally raise funds and provides performance opportunities for musicians and brings the community together around this art form. They put together the Charleston Jazz Orchestra, which is a big band and they perform 6 times a year here in Charleston. And this is currently the 16th year for the big band, which is exciting. And then a few years later, the organization added the Charleston Jazz Festival, which was a way for the organization to present internationally renowned jazz musicians that come to Charleston for 4 days to perform. And then a few years later, in 2017, the organization had an opportunity to begin a school to train young people and to give them opportunities to learn music and jazz in particular. The biggest reasons there is not enough music education available in schools is because there's not sufficient funding for it. There is plenty of evidence and data that connects academic achievements to participation in the arts in schools. And those students typically that are engaged in it, and so that's what we're here to do. We believe that the programs we make available to the community do that really effectively. A lot of the students actually at the academy that are participating are able to do so because of a scholarship fund that we have. And so anyone that we can find that would like to enroll in our programs, they can do so no matter of their background or financial availability for it. So
amazing. I think you joined Charleston Jazz in 2018. So you've been a leader and the leader for a few years through interesting times like COVID. What drew you to the Charleston Jazz?
I was looking for a new opportunity and to be the director of development at an organization and to be able to be a part of a smaller and younger organization that was growing was exciting to me because I feel like what I had to offer could make a difference in that organization. I worked for an incredible place, the College of Charleston and the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art, and I learned a lot working there. But I was ready to be a little bit more nimble and just have more creative ways to be impactful somewhere.
So you joined it so you could improvise yourself.
Yeah, I think so. And then the organization, I always kind of had my eye on it. Being in Charleston and being in the arts community was definitely an organization I knew about and I respect it. And so it was just the right opportunity at the right time.
Yeah.
So growing up, my parents always took us to all the arts and music offerings around town. I'm originally from Germany, so growing up in Germany, but then also later when we moved to South Carolina, they would always take us to all the arts programs. And it's because they were interested and they were engaged. I'm always told that they would, even young, like under 10, they would take us and sit in a really good seat at the symphony and we would clearly fall asleep, but they would take us anyway. So it was an expensive nap, but I think it really does make a difference for kids to have as much exposure to the arts as possible, whether it's from your upbringing and your family or through your school. That plants a seed, and for me, it definitely did.
How do you see it as part of your family?
I mean, we're not all equally engaged in the arts, actually, but both my parents are very much into the arts. So for some of it, it made a difference. And at the end of the day, your kids are interested in what they're interested in. I'm the one that ended up working in the arts. But yeah, I do believe that it can certainly build community, whether it's in the family or locally or in schools and in any sort of art setting, whether it's you walk into a museum or you sit in a concert, you are sharing experience with your fellow human beings. And you're coming together to experience something very unique and basically share the human experience, whether it's painted on canvas or performed on stage. So to me, I just never could imagine doing anything else.
So share some success stories of Charleston Jazz.
Most recently, I think the big success and the big thing that we still can't forget is the pandemic and being able to get through it without having to let any of our staff go and still being able to present performances and making sure our musicians still had some performing opportunities by moving everything outdoors. That definitely requires a lot of resilience and working really hard, and having a very effective and passionate board is obviously instrumental to that success. You can get through most things when you know when the end is. But if you don't know when it's ending, you're like, wow, this is interesting.
I remember Alva posting her video online of jazz on the porch. Yeah.
Actually, so cool when you are forced to literally think outside of the box and do things outside.
Yeah.
And that was another way where we all saw another example of how music is incredible and how it brings people together.
Right.
How you cannot imagine a world without music. And I think during the pandemic, that became very clear to people. Yeah, I think it really crystallized how powerful the arts are for a healthy community.
Share some success stories of some of the students from the academy.
Yeah, so we have these couple of young students that are high school students now that are in a combo, and they've just gotten all these incredible awards at the South Carolina State Jazz competitions there's an honors combo, and like 5 out of the 8 students are in the Charleston Jazz Academy. So it's just seeing those students excel, the listening skills and the empathy skills, being able to innovate and improvise, and the self-confidence that is required to be a good improviser, and developing those skills during adolescence and during that age is really incredible. That really provides them with an incredible toolkit that they can use no matter what fields they end up working in, whether they pursue music or music just stays a passion and they pursue something else. Either way, they will always have that.
So Tatiana, what do you see as the future of Charleston Jazz?
I see us educating more kids, just having bigger impacts in terms of numbers, being able to teach more kids. We're starting to teach and offer these combo classes at schools. So not only are we doing it at our school, which is the Charleston Jazz Academy, but we now go to actual K through 12 schools. We're trying to focus on the ones that are more rural areas or Title I schools and teach the combo classes. And so I envision that through all the different kinds of programs we offer, that the kids that are graduating in the Tri-County area will have had 4 to 5 impactful experiences because of our organization.
That's right.
And then you like appreciate jazz.
Absolutely.
And of course, the really cool thing as well about jazz is that it's completely connected to popular music, to hip hop, to rap, to rock and roll. You can find connections to all these art forms.
Absolutely. In fact, jazz was foundational to all those other art forms. Well, thank you so much for sharing time with me, Tatiana.
Of course, music by itself will not solve all of our problems. We need to figure that out together. But music by itself can make us feel more connected, feel closer to humanity. It can help manage our moods. If you and someone far different from you, different politics, different backgrounds, listen to a song that you both like, you're going to be nodding your heads together. You might be singing together. And maybe even, if you're really into it, you'll make that stank face. You know what I'm talking about. Hey, I had promised a mood lift at the end. So exactly 200 years ago, 1824, Ludwig van Beethoven was completely deaf. He was in poor health. He was isolated, depressed, financial problems, custody problems, all sorts of issues. And he wanted to write something that would uplift humanity, even in his dark condition. So he wrote, completely deaf, the Ninth Symphony. Amazing that he could do something like that. His final movement was based on Friedrich Schiller's poem, Ode an die Freude, a poem expressing the ideals of freedom, unity, and brotherhood of mankind, intending to be his greatest triumph. You think about that, we haven't really changed. So please enjoy Charleston Jazz version of Ode to Joy. I think Beethoven would have given his stank face of approval. Support live music.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Charleston Jazz Orchestra.
And this particular arrangement is from our good friend and former leader, Charlton Singleton. All right. So here we go, Ode to Joy.